quite bitter tasting. You can chew one leaf and it might not seem particularly bad tasting, but the more you chew, the worse it tastes. So the process of chewing 26 leaves is actually a bit of an ordeal. So anyway, back to the main point of my story. When myself and my two friends got together to try these leaves, we did the same thing. We each took 26 leaves, and we were sitting outdoors on a friend's veranda overlooking the chaparral-covered hillsides in Southern California. And so it was a fairly peaceful setting, and it was around dusk, so, it was starting to get a little bit dark and progressively dark. And so we chewed the leaves, and, I really didn't have much expectation of anything significant happening. I mean, I had heard about Brett Floss's experience, but I didn't know Brett. It was secondhand information. I was skeptical, and I actually, I kind of suspected that he was exaggerating, and, because most of the other reports I had heard indicated that Salvia really was quite mild and possibly didn't really even do anything. Some people who had tried the leaves and not experienced anything speculated that basically people who did report effects were just experiencing some kind of placebo effect from it. So anyway, we, the three of us, chewed our leaves with not much expectation. And about 15 or 20 minutes after I had first began to chew the leaves, I started to notice a slight shift in my vision, something very subtle that, I thought, I don't know. I'm obviously looking for some effect. And when you're looking for something, it's easy for your mind to, imagine things that aren't.
I know the feeling.
So I thought, well, maybe if I stand up and try and walk around, I'll notice some shift in my, I'll notice something more profoundly because maybe my sense of movement and balance will be affected. So I stood up and took a few steps, and I thought, I definitely feel something is a little different. And I looked around, and I noticed there was this kind of colored glow around surrounding objects, almost like a aura-like glow to things. This sort of pleasant, slight little few inches of glowiness about objects. And so when I noticed that, I said to my friends, I'm definitely feeling something now. And one of my friends, in response, said, oh, no, I don't feel anything. And actually, before he finished saying the word anything, he suddenly just fell out of the chaise lounge he was sitting on and just fell on the ground and started laughing hysterically. And he I said, well, are you okay? And he couldn't reply. He just kept laughing convulsively, and he tried to get some words out to answer me, but he couldn't control the laughter enough to speak. So, at this point I was feeling the effects, but not nearly as dramatically as he was. And the extraordinary thing was that it hit him so suddenly. 1 minute he didn't think anything was happening, and within seconds he was just, thrown into this other state. It was so dramatic. And he laughed that way for, I don't know, it seemed like an awfully long time. It was only, 2 or 3 minutes or something like that, but 2 or 3 minutes of uncontrollable laughter is a lot of laughter. So anyway, finally he was able to get some words out, and he said, are you in it? And I said, well, in what? And because, I would say, well, do you mean do I feel something, or, what are you talking about? And he was just too far gone to really communicate much more than that. And it wasn't until later, when the effects were subsiding, a couple hours later, that we talked about it. And I said, well, what did you mean when you said, are you in it? And he said, well, suddenly when I fell out of that chair, I suddenly was underground in some cavern someplace. And that's what he was asking is, are we in it? Were we in this space that he was in? Anyway, but my own experience was I wasn't in it. I was in other places, but not that particular place. But as the effects became more pronounced, I found myself, well, I never totally lost touch with ordinary reality. I mean, I was still aware of my environment, but there were things in the environment that aren't ordinarily there. Things look different. I described, this glowy light quality surrounding things. But at some point I noticed in the hillsides near us, which are basically just empty hillsides. Well, not empty. They're covered with chaparral bushes and shrubs. But I looked up and I noticed these little houses sort of tucked away, sort of built into the hillside, and they're sort of scattered around the hills in the distance. And you could see as it got darker these little lights coming from the windows. And it was the oddest thing. They looked like the closest thing I could compare it to is the Hobbit homes that you read about in the Tolkien novels, as well as the film depictions in these little houses that are sort of built into the earth.
You know what comes to my mind right at this moment? I'm just about to finish Graham Hancock's new book, Supernatural, which I highly recommend. And he has a big section in there about the medieval fairies, and what you're describing is one of the scenes right out of medieval times, I think.
Right, yeah, well, I'm sure those stories were, a big influence on Tolkien's writing, so, yeah, I'm sure the Hobbit houses came out of European mythology. But, yeah, it was like that, and I had this sense that the inhabitants of these houses were some kind of fairy-like nature spirits that were always there and just not ordinarily seen. And at the time, it just seemed like, oh yeah, of course, that's the way it always is. It seemed completely normal and natural, and it didn't shock me as some kind of revelation or something bizarre or some kind of twisted mind game. It seemed like, oh yeah, that's natural. That's the way things are. And that sense of naturalness and familiarity pervaded the entire experience. I just felt like I was being embraced by nature and sort of tuning into this aspect of the natural world that I'm not ordinarily perceiving. My girlfriend, who was there at the time, she said it was like being rocked in the arms of Mother Nature. And all three of us, when we talked about the experience later, agreed that there was something very comfortable and natural and nurturing about the feelings that pervaded the experience. One other thing that I remember from that was that when we were talking about the experiences, one of us said something like, oh, and I remember seeing these kind of fairy-like beings, but they were kind of like children, and they had very long eyelashes, and then they had a bit of a cartoonish quality. They weren't completely solid. They had a bit of a ephemeral, almost a colorful transparency to them. And I forget which of us was the first to comment on that, but whoever it was, the other two said, oh, that's bizarre. I saw those things too, and they had those really long eyelashes. So it's very bizarre. Why would three people independently have this feature of these really long eyelashed little beings? Who knows?
Well, Daniel, that's one of the things that really fascinates me about salvia is the how similar a lot of the experiences seem to be in the way people describe them. I've had kind of a wide range of friends that have varying degrees of experience with a lot of substances and some with none, and they all come back with this feeling of familiarity, being embraced, welcome home kind of thing, and the little entities quite often. It's just astounding to me because more than any other psychoactive substance that I know of, the similarity of stories seems to follow with salvia.
Yeah, there is a lot of similarity. Although I find that different people have different kinds of experiences. If you take a population of whatever number, say, just for argument's sake, like 100, and ask these people about their experiences, and let's talk about people who have had several experiences. I find that there's kind of group categories of types of experiences that people have, And some people might have experiences that vary and fall into different categories. But some people seem to only, tend to have one particular type of experience. But there'll be lots of other people who also have that type of experience. And then there's, other people who have a different type, and they sort of fall into this other group. For an example, one of the more common types of experiences people have is often people have visions of places that that are reminiscent of early childhood. Places like school playgrounds or the backyard of their parents' house where they lived when they were 6 or 7 years old. And for some reason, a lot of people tune into this particular period of life of early childhood, roughly between 6 and 9 years old, around that period of life. And it's extraordinarily common it's curious, well, why that particular time in life? You don't hear a lot of people saying that they found themselves back in high school or in college. It's for some reason they find themselves in these places from early childhood. So there's something interesting about that, with Salvia being able to key into that particular life period. And certain people, quite a lot of people have that type of experience, whereas other people never have that type of experience. Another very common one, well, in fact, I fall into that category of often having those early childhood visions. But other people often report experiences of becoming objects. And I've never had that experience, and a lot of people haven't, but a significant percentage of people become objects when they do Salvia. And, it just seems like such an odd phenomenon, but it's extraordinary when people describe that. They're often just, they make a big point about saying, well, it's not like I just sort of felt as if I was a wall or a refrigerator or whatever. I was that thing, and there was no question about it, and it was as if that was the way it was, and I would always be that thing. And, I was concerned that I would never come back from that.
Wow.
And that's another, one of those weird Salvia effects. I'm sure that kind of thing can also happen with other psychedelics as well, but, it seems particularly characteristic of Salvia. And there's the sort of broad categories of types of experiences that people have with it.
Well, that Salvia is so unique, and that's one of the reasons that prompted me to do this interview with you, is that in hearing some of the other experiences that people are writing into various podcasts about, it appeared real obvious to me that they hadn't been to your website to read the free user guide and really learn more about how to use Salvia. I think some people are thinking they can just have a toke or two of Salvia and have a quick experience, and maybe we should cover a little bit about what's really the sacred way to use this, to have a true Salvia experience and to respect the plant itself too.
Yeah. Well, let me just preface that with something. I had told you about my initial experience with the leaves, and basically it was that experience that made me, the experience fascinated me, and that fascination led me to a whole string of further experiments with the leaves and efforts to, I won't even go into those. It gets to be a very long story because it's been years of experiments and research. But ultimately, it led me to do a string of experiments with Salvia that, which resulted in my isolation of a crystalline substance from the leaves, which is now known to be Salvinorin A. And that was quite a extraordinary discovery, at least it was from my perspective. It turned out that this compound turned out to be responsible for the mind-altering effects of the plant, which was interesting in itself because although this compound had been isolated from leaves previously, it had not been determined that it was responsible for the visionary effects of the plant. So I isolated this compound, but when I tried it, I discovered that this stuff was extraordinarily potent, which was quite a surprise because it takes quite a lot of leaves to get much an effect when you take the leaves in the traditional fashion. So it was a surprise to find that it contained one of the most potent visionary compounds known. The problem with chewing the leaves is it's not a very efficient way of getting that compound into your body because apparently it's either poorly absorbed or largely deactivated by gastrointestinal fluids. It's quite bitter tasting. You can chew one leaf and it might not seem particularly bad tasting, but the more you chew, the worse it tastes. So the process of chewing 26 leaves is actually a bit of an ordeal. So anyway, back to the main point of my story. When myself and my two friends got together to try these leaves, we did the same thing. We each took 26 leaves, and we were sitting outdoors on a friend's veranda over after I had first began to chew the leaves. I started to notice a slight shift in my vision, something very subtle that, I thought, I don't know. I'm obviously looking for some effect. And when you're looking for something, it's easy for your mind to, imagine things that aren't.
I know the feeling.
I thought, well, maybe if I stand up and try and walk around, I'll notice some shift in my, I'll notice something more. We're looking the chaparral-covered hillsides in Southern California. And so it was a fairly peaceful setting, and it was around dusk, so, it was starting to get a little bit dark and progressively dark. And so we chewed the leaves, and, I really didn't have much expectation of anything significant happening. I mean, I had heard about Brett Floss's experience, but I didn't know Brett. It was secondhand information. I was skeptical, and I actually, I kind of suspect profoundly because of, maybe my sense of movement and balance will be affected. So I stood up and took a few steps, and I thought, I definitely feel something is a little different. And I looked around, and I noticed there was this kind of colored glow around surrounding objects, almost like a aura-like glow to things. This sort of pleasant, slight little few inches of glowiness affected it. He was exaggerating, and because most of the other reports I had heard indicated that Salvia really was quite mild and possibly didn't really even do anything. Some people who had tried the leaves and not experienced anything speculated that basically people who did report effects were just experiencing some kind of placebo effect from it. So anyway, we, the three of us, chewed our leaves with not much expectation, and about 15 or 20 minutes